I'm Ethan Miller, 38 years old, the forgotten branch of a family that wears humiliation like tradition. For years, I told myself I'd never walk through those gates again. In the Miller clan, Samuel has always been the golden sun tailored suits, glasses raised in triumph while I was the boy, mocked for every misstep, the cousin they kept at the edge of the table just to laugh at. Their approval never reached me, but their scorn never missed. The breaking point came years ago, when Samuel twisted my grandfather's will, burying the truth of what was rightfully mine. From that day, I knew I wasn't just excluded, I had been erased. Ever been summoned to a family dinner, only to realize it was really a trial? Hit like if someone ever used family as a weapon. Comment if you've ever been the scapegoat in your own bloodline. It all began the night I drove back to the mansion I swore I'd never enter again, summoned by Samuel's letter, written in ink that pretended warmth but carried nothing but knives. Every pair of eyes at the table pierced through me as if I were an intruder. The moment I crossed the threshold of the dining hall, the warmth of the chandelier light could not soften the chill that settled in my chest. Echoes of old insults stirred like restless ghosts in my head, taunts about my clothes, my failures, my absence from family gatherings. They whispered warnings of what was about to unfold, reminders that this house had never been a sanctuary, but a stage for ridicule. The room itself radiated grandeur. The long mahogany table gleamed under golden light, lined with fine china and silverware polished to a mirror shine. Candles flickered in crystal holders, and the turkey carved and steaming sat at the center like an idol of plenty. Yet all that elegance only framed the real feast. The looks of judgment from every seat, the measuring eyes of people who never forgave me for being different. Samuel guided me toward an empty chair, his hand hovering at my back in a mockery of courtesy. His voice carried too easily. "Everyone, look who's finally returned to the family table." The silence that followed was heavier than any welcome. Forks paused, wine glasses froze halfway to lips, and a dozen sets of eyes locked on me, as if I were a stranger, stumbling in from the cold. I sat slowly, forcing a calm I didn't feel, the leather chair swallowing me into a place I had once dreaded. Small talk began, shallow and sharp. A cousin remarked on my jacket too plain, apparently. An aunt inquired about whether I was still renting, as though it were a disease. The words dripped with a sweetness that cut like vinegar, every question wrapped in politeness yet laced with mockery. I tried to answer without giving them satisfaction, but the room seemed determined to pull me down. Samuel leaned back in his chair, wine swirling lazily in his glass, watching me struggle. His smirk was the silent conductor of this orchestra of disdain. The more he sat in silence, the more others filled it with their snide observations, eager to please the man who styled himself the center of the family. My thoughts burned. Every quip pulled up memories of birthdays overshadowed by other cousins' achievements, dinners where my plate was the smallest, or holidays when my silence was interpreted as stupidity. The weight of years pressed on me, and though I clenched my hands beneath the table, I felt their laughter pressing against my skin. Conversation turned sharper. A cousin asked about my latest project. Though his grin betrayed the trap, he knew nothing of my work and assumed there was nothing to know. An aunt complimented my bravery in showing up tonight, as though walking into this hall were a fool's errand. I felt their questions closing in like wolves circling, testing for weakness. Then came the moment Samuel had clearly orchestrated. He raised his glass, his voice smooth as velvet. "It's been far too long since Ethan joined us," he said, pausing so that every head turned again in my direction. "Surely he has much to share." The silence stretched. I could hear the faint clink of silverware, the creak of a chair. It was an older uncle who delivered the blow. His voice carried down the table, loud enough to drown the whispers. "Still unemployed, Ethan?" The words sliced through me like a blade, and before I could form an answer, the room erupted. Laughter rolled like thunder, bouncing off the chandelier, echoing in my ears. It wasn't just a chuckle, it was release, a chorus of delight at my expense. They laughed not because the question was clever, but because it reminded them of their favorite family role. Me, the failure, the scapegoat, the convenient target of superiority. I felt the heat rise in my face, my chest tight with the urge to shout, to reveal truths they could not begin to imagine. But not yet, not now. My time would come. For now, I sat in silence, letting the laughter wash over me, memorizing every face twisted with amusement, every glass lifted in mock salute. And then, just as the noise peaked, the door to the hall opened. A figure stepped inside, and the air seemed to shift. She was dazzling, poised, the kind of presence that silenced conversations mid-word. Victoria, my ex, once the love of my life, walks in, dazzling and confident. She was more radiant than ever, yet she was the deepest scar of my past. When Victoria stepped into the room, the laughter that had been swirling around me seemed to falter for a beat, as though her presence demanded the air itself pause. My chest tightened. Memories I had buried clawed their way up with cruel speed, her perfume in the summer, her laugh in the winter, the way she once held my hand when the world seemed unbearable. And then the betrayal, the night she let go, choosing security and wealth over the fragile thing we had built together. The clink of wine glasses and the forced laughter of my relatives filled the silence she left in her wake as she moved toward the table. Every eye followed her like moths to flame. She had mastered this performance, each step elegant, each glance calculated. Dressed in a gown that shimmered beneath the chandelier, she was no longer the girl I had once loved, but a woman polished by privilege, armored in success that had never been hers, but had clung to her like perfume. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. I heard the whispers ripple along the line of family members, her beauty, her career, her marriage that had elevated her into the circles they admired. They spoke of her as though she were royalty returning to a court. None of them remembered or cared that once she had been mine. She reached my side and smiled down at me, the same smile that had once undone me, now sharpened by condescension. "Ethan," she said warmly, as though my name were a trinket she had just found in a drawer. "It's been far too long." Her voice carried a music that pulled at old wounds. I forced myself to meet her gaze. "Yes, it has," I said evenly, though inside I could feel the ground of years ago opening beneath me. She slipped into the chair across from me, tilting her head, her eyes roaming as if studying a curious artifact. Her words came dressed in nostalgia. "Do you remember the lake house that summer? How you swore we'd make something big of ourselves." She laughed softly, shaking her head as if at a sweet, naive joke. "I suppose dreams change, don't they?" Each remark dug deeper, reminding me not of shared warmth, but of the cold way she had walked out, hand in hand, with a man whose bank account had outweighed my promises. Her tone carried no cruelty on the surface, but beneath it I heard the sharp edge of dismissal. Across the table, Samuel leaned back, enjoying every second. He raised his glass with that infuriating smirk. "Yes, Ethan," he said loudly, drawing attention. "You and Victoria were inseparable once. Pity it didn't last. Some of us always knew she deserved better." Laughter rippled down the table again, weaker this time, but sharp enough to sting. Samuel's eyes sparkled as if this were his favorite sport, my humiliation, seasoned now with the salt of old heartbreak. Victoria's expression softened into something like sympathy, though it was theater as much as the chandeliers above. She leaned slightly closer, her voice low, silk over steel. "You still haven't made anything of yourself, Ethan?" The words sliced through me, framed as pity but carrying the weight of judgment, of comparison to every man she had deemed more worthy. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth, holding her gaze, unwilling to flinch. The room around me hummed with murmurs, forks clinking, conversations half-whispered but all orbiting the same spectacle, me, cornered between past love and present mockery. Then the door at the far end of the hall opened. A new figure stepped into view, her presence cutting through the noise with quiet authority. Grace Thompson, my old college friend, now a lawyer, appears at the doorway, locking eyes with me. In a house where every voice tore me down, one voice quietly stood by me. The moment Grace's eyes met mine across the dining hall, a rush of memories broke through the noise, the late nights in the college library, the papers we struggled through together, the way I once lent her money for books when she couldn't afford them. Back then, she had called me a lifeline. I had nearly forgotten those days, and yet in her gaze now, there was a recognition, an echo of gratitude that no one else in this house could ever muster. I could barely stand another round of smirks from across the table, so when she nodded toward the corridor, I rose without excuse and followed her. The clatter of cutlery and forced laughter faded behind us as the heavy doors closed, leaving only the dim flicker of a wall sconce casting shadows on the narrow hall. My heartbeat slowed, but my chest still burned from Victoria's whisper, from Samuel's taunts, from the chorus of contempt that filled the air like smoke. Grace's voice was low, but steady, carrying the calm of someone who knew her ground. "Ethan," she said, touching my arm gently, "don't let them bury you in their noise. You are not the boy they used to laugh at." Her words came like a balm I hadn't realized I needed. For years, silence had been my armor. But in that silence, I had almost forgotten who I was. I looked at her carefully, wondering what had brought her back into this den of wolves. "Why are you here?" I asked. "No one ever comes to these dinners without a reason." Her smile was faint, almost sad. "I have a reason," she said. "And it isn't them, it's you. I've kept track of things, Ethan. I know more than you think. About the company, about the estate, about your grandfather's will." The name alone made my throat tighten. My grandfather, the only miller who had shown me genuine kindness, had left behind more than memories. Rumors had circulated for years about his will, about the inheritance meant to preserve fairness in the family. Samuel had always claimed control, boasting that the documents left him as the natural heir, dismissing my place entirely. I had never challenged him, never thought I could. I studied Grace's face, the seriousness in her eyes. "You've seen it?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. She nodded. "I've seen the copy, the real one, and I've seen what Samuel has done to hide it. He's been living in fear of this night. He knows the truth will surface eventually." My breath caught. In the faint light of the corridor, the years of humiliation replayed themselves, every sneer. Every time Samuel reminded me I was nothing. And here was proof, waiting quietly in Grace's hands, that his empire of arrogance was built on lies. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, firm and unshakable. "You are not poor, Ethan. They will regret everything tonight." The words sank deep, a promise and a warning. For the first time that evening, I felt something stir inside me, not just defiance, but anticipation. The ridicule I had endured at the table was nothing compared to the reckoning that was coming, but as the weight of her words settled, a faint sound broke the fragile safety of our moment. A floorboard creaked, just beyond the corner. I turned sharply, but the light from the hall only revealed shadows. Grace froze, her eyes narrowing. There was movement again, too deliberate to be coincidence. Samuel, lurking nearby, catches fragments of our conversation, suspicion flashing in his eyes. The room roared with laughter, and I was the punchline. It started as a trickle, one cousin's sharp quip, an aunt's coy observation, and then it spread like fire across dry grass. Every mocking remark since my arrival had led to this moment, building toward a crescendo of cruelty that I could feel in my bones. The sound filled the grand dining hall until even the chandelier above seemed to shake with their mirth. Wine glasses clinked as if in celebration of my humiliation. Their faces blurred together into a single wall of disdained smirks, raised brows, eyes glittering with enjoyment at my expense. The long mahogany table had transformed into a stage, and I was cast in the role they'd written for me long ago. The failure, the disappointment, the shameful cousin who could never measure up. Samuel orchestrated it with the ease of a conductor. Every phrase he spoke was bait, and the family snapped at it eagerly, piling on their own insults. "Still living alone, Ethan?" one cousin asked, his grin wide enough to show wine-stained teeth. "What a lonely life." Another chimed in, "Perhaps we should take a collection, help him buy a decent suit." The chorus of laughter swelled again, fueled by cruelty disguised as banter. Victoria sat just across the table, her polished smile cutting deeper than the words. She didn't need to add much, her mere presence was reminder enough of the choice she had made, the life she had claimed by abandoning me. She glanced at me occasionally, her eyes gleaming with something between amusement and pity, as if this spectacle confirmed she had been right all along. I could feel my grip tightening around the stem of my glass. Part of me wanted to shout, to rise and hurl every truth in their faces, the wealth they had dismissed, the empire I had quietly built, the inheritance Samuel feared. But I held it in, teeth clenched, forcing myself to endure just a moment longer. Samuel leaned forward, resting his elbows casually on the table. His voice was smooth, laced with mock sincerity. "We're all just so glad you joined us tonight, Ethan," he said, pausing for effect. "It wouldn't be a real family gathering without you." The chuckles that followed had the rhythm of rehearsed lines, as though they had played this scene before. He raised his glass, the wine catching the light, his eyes fixed on me. "To Ethan, the poor and pathetic cousin we all pity." The eruption of laughter that followed was deafening. Aunts dabbed their eyes with napkins, as if the joke had been too much to bear. Uncles slapped the table, forks rattling against china. Even the younger cousins, who hardly knew me, joined in the spectacle, their voices eager to please Samuel. Heat surged up my neck, flooding my face with fire. The humiliation was complete, the circle of mockery closing tight around me. And yet, beneath the shame, something else began to grow, something sharp, unyielding, unstoppable. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor, the sound slicing through their laughter. The glass in my hand trembled, not from weakness but from the force of everything I had held back until now. My voice carried across the table, steady and cold, each word cutting through the din. You will regret every word once you learn the truth. The sound of my glass hitting the floor silenced the room. Crystal shattered across the polished wood, wine spreading in a crimson stain between the silver candlesticks and carved platters. The laughter that had thundered only seconds earlier cut off like a song halted mid-note. A hush fell so heavy I could hear my own breath echoing inside me. Their faces frozen, startled watched, as if they weren't sure whether I had broken the glass by accident or intention. I let the silence stretch. My warning from moments before, you will regret every word, hung between us like smoke that refused to clear. I could feel it in their unease, in the subtle shifts of posture, in the way forks rested untouched on plates. They were waiting, some out of amusement, others out of dread, all curious to see if I would shrink back into the corner they had always reserved for me. Instead, I straightened. My voice was low, but firm enough to carry across the table. You've all assumed my life has amounted to nothing, I said. You see what you want to see, a man who walked away and never came back? But maybe you've missed what I've been doing in the years you laughed behind my back. A ripple passed through the room. Eyes flickered between each other, whispers barely stirring lips. An aunt shifted uneasily in her chair. A cousin frowned, his hand tightening around his napkin. The certainty of my failure, their favorite story, no longer felt unshakable. I caught it in their glances, the first fragile cracks in their confidence. Victoria tilted her head, her smile polished but her eyes sharper now, searching me for something new. She wanted to read me, to decipher whether this was bluster or revelation. The memory of her whisper, "You still haven't made anything of yourself," burned inside me. She had chosen another man's wealth over me, but here I stood, alive with truths they had not even begun to imagine. I leaned slightly forward, deliberately calm. There are things I own, companies I've built, places my name is written where none of you have ever looked. And tonight, I paused, watching their unease grow. Tonight, you'll finally see what you've all ignored. A murmur swept the table. Someone cleared their throat too loudly. A younger cousin, barely old enough to understand, looked at me with wide, curious eyes, then at the adults as if searching for reassurance. For the first time, I wasn't the only one on edge, they were. Samuel's laugh broke through the tension, sharp and dismissive, snapping the attention back to him. "Listen to him," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with mockery. "He's spinning fairy tales. We've all heard them before. The mysterious success, the invisible fortune." He spread his hands as if presenting a show, and yet nothing to show, nothing to prove. His grin widened. Same old Ethan. His confidence steadied them for a moment. I saw relief return to some faces, laughter flickering at the edges of their mouths, ready to rise again. But others weren't so sure anymore. Doubt had been planted. The uncle who had mocked me earlier leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Wait," he said, louder than he probably intended. His eyes narrowed on me. "What company is he talking about?" The question struck the room like a spark. Conversation halted again, every gaze turning toward me with new weight. Suspicion, curiosity, fear. For the first time, it wasn't laughter that filled their eyes, it was the shadow of doubt. Before I could answer, Samuel leaned back in his chair, that insufferable smirk returning to his face. His voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Don't let him fool you, he owns nothing." Samuel's voice dripped venom, and I knew he wouldn't stop until I was destroyed. The room, already thick with tension, seemed to lean in around us, every flicker of candlelight sharpening the shadows across his face. His eyes glimmered with the kind of satisfaction only cruelty could bring, and he didn't waste a second twisting the silence to his advantage. "You all want to know about Ethan's mysterious fortune?" Samuel said, swirling the wine in his glass with theatrical flair. "Let me spare you the disappointment. He's drowning in debt. Creditors chase him like dogs after scraps. The only thing he owns is a pile of overdue bills." A murmur of approval rippled down the table. Some family members chuckled, others shook their heads with feigned pity. I could see them lapping it up, desperate for Samuel's version of me to remain true. They wanted their narrative of failure intact. It excused their own indifference, justified the years of contempt. I gritted my teeth but stayed silent, though my heart thundered in my chest. Samuel wasn't done. He scanned me slowly, letting his gaze crawl over my clothes. "And look at him tonight," he continued. "Plain jacket, no watch worth more than $50. Shoes that could have come from a thrift store. Is this the portrait of a wealthy man? No, this is the portrait of a pretender." Laughter rose again, thinner than before but loud enough to sting. Uncle Richard slapped the table, his booming voice joining in. "You're right, Sam. If he were truly successful, he wouldn't come dressed like that." His words drew another round of chuckles. I felt the humiliation pressing down, but this time it mingled with something else: anticipation. They had no idea how close they were to being undone. No idea how fragile their confidence in Samuel really was. Samuel pressed harder, sensing victory. He walks in here after years of absence, throwing out vague claims about companies and ownership. Please, if he had anything worth bragging about, wouldn't we have heard of it? Wouldn't he be living in Manhattan penthouses instead of— He let the sentence trail off, then delivered it with a smirk. "Instead of hiding in some dingy apartment?" Laughter again, though cracks showed. A few relatives avoided my eyes now, uncertain. Victoria, though, leaned back in her chair, her smile sharp, watching the exchange with a predator's patience. She hadn't spoken yet, but her silence was a blade waiting for the right moment to cut. Samuel suddenly slammed his glass down, the sharp crack echoing through the dining hall. His voice rose, cutting through the chatter. "If Ethan is wealthy, let him prove it right here, right now." The demand struck like a thunderclap. Every eye turned to me at once, the air tightening as though the walls themselves leaned in. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I did not look away. The time was coming, sooner than I had planned, but I would not flinch. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Victoria's chair sliding closer. She leaned in, her perfume brushing the air between us, her eyes glittering with amusement and something sharper curiosity. Her voice was soft but cut through me all the same. "Yes, Ethan, show us." I smiled, and for the first time, Samuel's confidence cracked. It was only a flicker, a tightening at the corner of his mouth, a twitch of his fingers around the stem of his wineglass, but I caught it. And judging by the way the room suddenly stilled, the others noticed too. The laughter that had filled the mansion just moments before now faded into a silence so sharp it seemed to hum in the air. Every face turned toward me, waiting for either my collapse or my retaliation. Grace's words echoed in my mind, steady and clear. "They will regret everything tonight." I slid my hand into the inside pocket of my jacket and felt the thick paper pressing against my palm. The weight of it steadied me. For years I had endured their scorn, their mockery, their attempts to paint me as nothing but a failure. Tonight was the night that story ended. Without speaking, I drew the envelope out and placed it on the polished mahogany table. The faint thud it made was louder than thunder in the suffocating silence. Samuel's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing as if he could see through the paper to what lay inside. "An envelope?" Uncle Richard scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is this some kind of joke?" I didn't answer. My fingers tore through the seal, and I spread the contents across the table with deliberate care. Thin, crisp papers gleamed under the chandelier's golden light. Property deeds with my name in bold print, share certificates bearing corporate seals, signatures, legal stamps. I had prepared them meticulously, not for their sake, but for my own dignity. The reaction was immediate. A wave of murmurs swept down the table, whispers colliding in disbelief. A cousin gasped audibly. Another leaned forward so far her necklace dangled into her wine. Uncle Richard's hand trembled as he snatched up one of the deeds, his eyes scanning the fine print with growing horror. This can't be real," he muttered, as if saying it aloud might make it so. I leaned back, calm in the storm. "It's very real. Properties across Manhattan, shares in a company you've all heard of but never thought I could own. Every insult you've thrown at me has been built on ignorance." The whispers swelled, doubt spreading like fire in dry grass. A few faces, the ones who had laughed loudest earlier, now looked away in shame. I felt the shift fragile but undeniable. But Samuel would not let it stand. His chair screeched against the marble floor as he surged forward, his hand slamming onto the papers. The sharp crack of his palm against the table made several relatives flinch. His face flushed, his eyes burned with fury. "These are forgeries!" he roared, his voice shaking with rage. The room fell into stunned silence again, the weight of his accusation hanging heavy. All eyes darted between him and me, caught between disbelief and the sudden, thrilling possibility that Samuel was no longer the unshakable authority they had always trusted. Her laughter faded, replaced by something she thought she'd buried regret. For so long, Victoria's smile had been her armor, a polished veneer she wore like a crown. But now, with the evidence spread across the table and the family's whispers cracking the once solid walls of Samuel's dominion, that smile faltered. The tilt of her lips quivered, and in her eyes I saw something raw, something she never wanted me to witness again: doubt. The dining hall buzzed with uncertainty. My papers lay scattered like fallen dominoes, each one a challenge to the narrative Samuel had built over years of manipulation. Uncles and aunts whispered, cousins exchanged uneasy glances, and Grace, quiet but steady, watched me with a nod of reassurance. Samuel's fury burned hot at the head of the table, but for the moment he was caged by the family's confusion. That was when Victoria leaned forward, her fingers brushing the stem of her glass, her voice suddenly softer. "Ethan," she said, and my name on her tongue stirred memories I had locked away. I didn't know. You've done so well, I can see that now." Her eyes glistened, as if she had rehearsed sincerity for this very moment. "Perhaps I was wrong about you." The words carried across the table like the faint echo of a song I had once believed in. Years ago she had stood before me with that same voice, only then it had been filled with finality, a choice made for wealth, for security, for the golden life Samuel promised. Now, irony cut sharper than any knife. She was reaching back toward me, clinging to a version of herself she had abandoned, and the hypocrisy stung. Samuel seized the opportunity with relish. His laugh was cruel, his voice dripping contempt. "Listen to her now, Ethan, praising you as if she hadn't tossed you aside the moment a better offer came along. Hypocrisy runs as deep as her vanity." He leaned closer to her, his smirk widening. "Didn't you say once you'd never waste another second on him? Or has his little pile of papers changed your mind?" Victoria's cheeks flushed, and she opened her mouth to reply, but I beat her to it. My voice was colder than the marble floor beneath us, steady as a blade honed over years of silence. "You chose money years ago, Victoria, and you chose the wrong man." The words sliced the air. Gasps rippled across the room. A cousin nearly dropped his fork, an aunt covered her mouth, and for the first time in years, Victoria's composure shattered completely. Her eyes darted between me and Samuel, her carefully built poise unraveling strand by strand. Samuel, however, could not endure the humiliation. His chair screeched backward as he rose, his fist crashing against the table with a violent crack that made the glasses tremble. "Enough!" he thundered, his voice a roar that silenced every whisper in the room. His face blazed red, veins standing out along his temples. "He's deceiving all of you!" The dinner turned into a courtroom, and Grace was holding the gavel. One moment the hall was a place of crystal glasses, roasted turkey, and hollow laughter. The next it was a tribunal where every whispered insult and every mocking glance had become evidence. The chandelier above seemed harsher now, its light casting judgment over all of us, making every crease in Samuel's scowl and every flicker of doubt in the others' faces more vivid. Grace rose from her seat with a calmness that cut through the tension. Her hand slid into her leather briefcase, and when she withdrew a thick, cream-colored document bound with a ribbon, the room collectively inhaled. I sat still, letting the moment unfold, knowing what was about to be revealed would either save me or seal my fate. "This," Grace said firmly, her voice steady, "is a certified copy of your grandfather's will." Murmurs erupted instantly. Forks clattered against plates, wine glasses wobbled in nervous hands. Uncle Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "That will was settled years ago," he said. "We all saw the division. Samuel made sure of it." Grace's lips curved faintly, though her eyes remained sharp. "What you saw was a fabrication, a revision created under questionable circumstances. This," she tapped the heavy parchment with a polished nail, "is the original. It names Ethan Miller as the primary heir." The words struck like a hammer. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen. Then chaos erupted. Aunts gasped, cousins shouted over one another, chairs scraped backward as voices rose in protest and disbelief. The fortress of lies Samuel had built for years was crumbling right in front of him, and everyone could feel it. I watched Samuel's face darken, his jaw working furiously as his composure slipped. He slammed his palm on the table so hard the silverware rattled. "Lies!" he roared, his voice hoarse with rage. "This is nothing but a conspiracy. They're plotting to steal everything from this family, to rob you of what is rightfully yours." His words dripped with venom, but for the first time I saw hesitation in the others. Doubt had taken root. Their eyes, once so quick to laugh at me, now flicked uneasily between Samuel and the papers Grace held. They wanted to believe him, but the official weight of that parchment, the authority in Grace's voice, and the unshakable seal glimmering faintly on its edge told a different story. The din quieted when Grace, with perfect timing, let the final blow fall. From her briefcase she produced a small, circular emblem of gold and red, the official seal of the probate court. She set it down on the table with a sharp click, and its presence seemed to echo louder than Samuel's shouting. Her voice cut through the silence like a verdict delivered. "This is the truth," she said, eyes locked on Samuel. "And it cannot be buried anymore." For the first time that night, I saw fear flicker in Samuel's eyes. It was only a flash, a shadow that passed quickly as he tried to smother it under the same arrogance he had worn for years. But I caught it, and judging from the hush that fell across the room, others did too. The grand chandelier above seemed to spotlight his unease, illuminating every twitch of his jaw and every bead of sweat gathering near his temple. The weight of Grace's words still hung heavy, the seal on the table glinting like a verdict no one could ignore. But Samuel, cornered, refused to yield. He slammed his hand down, rattling the glasses, his voice booming through the hall. "Do you really think this nobody deserves anything?" His finger stabbed the air in my direction, venom dripping from each syllable. "He's leeched off this family his whole life. A man with no ambition, no achievements, nothing but excuses. You're fools to believe in his charade of wealth." The words rang with practiced fury, but I noticed his pitch was too sharp, his tone too desperate. Years of humiliation at his hands had taught me the rhythm of his confidence. This was not it. This was panic, clawing at the edges of control. Grace rose again, unfazed by his tirade. She adjusted her glasses, her poise deliberate, every move calculated like an attorney standing before a judge. "If this were merely a charade, Samuel, then why does the probate court carry this will as record? Why does your grandfather's signature, notarized and certified, stand against your every accusation?" Her voice was firm, precise, cutting through his bluster like a knife through silk. The room shifted. Murmurs swelled as uncles and aunts exchanged uneasy glances. A cousin whispered, "Could it be true?" Another muttered. But Samuel said, only to trail off, uncertain now. The fortress Samuel had built on intimidation and lies was crumbling. Samuel's face contorted. He leaned forward, his fists pressing into the table, knuckles white. "You think legal words make truth? She's his ally. They plotted this together, schemed behind our backs to disgrace me." He gestured wildly between Grace and me, his voice climbing in pitch. "You've always been jealous of my position, Ethan, always wanted what was mine. And now you think you've found a loophole to steal it." But the harder he pushed, the weaker his case became. Grace, calm as a surgeon, began citing passages directly from the will, her tone steady as she read aloud clauses that bore my name. "To my grandson, Ethan Miller, I leave primary stewardship of the estate and controlling interest in the family holdings." The words carried like thunder, impossible to refute. The whispers grew louder, doubt blooming in every corner of the hall. Faces turned toward Samuel, no longer filled with trust but with suspicion. I watched his mask crack, and then the fatal slip came not from me, not from Grace, but from his own blood. Uncle Richard, red-faced and trembling, blurted out words he had buried too long. He hid the original will. I saw him that night. The hall froze. A gasp rippled across the table, as if the entire room inhaled at once. Forks clattered, wine glasses tipped, and all eyes snapped to Samuel, his face drained of color, rage giving way to shock. I leaned forward, my voice steady, deliberate, a blade to his throat. "It's over for you, and you know it." Samuel's control crumbled, brick by brick, until only rage was left. The grand dining hall, once so carefully arranged with crystal glasses and golden candlesticks, had become a battleground of voices, shouts clashing against whispers, accusations piercing the air like arrows. The gleam of the chandelier no longer felt warm but harsh, exposing every crack in his armor, every twitch of his trembling hands. He lunged at Richard's words with desperation. "Lies," he bellowed. His spit sprang across the table as his fists rattled the cutlery. The old man was confused in his last days. Richard drank too much that night, he remembers nothing. You'll all take the word of a bitter drunk over me? But his denial sounded brittle, breaking under its own weight. Richard stood straighter, emboldened by the truth he had unleashed. I was there, he said firmly, his voice trembling but resolute. I saw you take the envelope from grandfather's desk. You thought no one noticed, but I did. I carried that guilt for years. His eyes burned with shame, but also with a new kind of freedom. And I won't keep it anymore. The family erupted, voices rising in discordant harmony. Is this true? Samuel, answer him. How could you? The tide had shifted, and Samuel felt it. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words. But each attempt fell shorter than the last. Grace moved with quiet precision. From her briefcase, she withdrew another document, its paper crisp, the ink sharp and undeniable. She laid it on the table, her tone cool but unyielding. This is a sworn affidavit from grandfather's attorney, dated 2 weeks before his passing. It confirms the will Richard described. It confirms Ethan as the rightful heir. She placed her finger firmly on the notary seal, her eyes meeting every doubtful glance. This is corroboration, not speculation. Proof. The murmurs swelled into outrage. A cousin shouted, "He cheated us all!" Another cried, "He stole what was never his." Even those who had mocked me hours ago now turned on him, their faces twisted with betrayal. Samuel's eyes darted wildly from face to face, searching for an ally. Victoria looked away, her lips pressed tight, her once dazzling smile extinguished. Uncle Richard refused to flinch. Even the younger cousins, who had always hung on his every boast, now avoided his gaze. He was a king stripped of his throne, standing bare before his court. Then came the voice that shattered the final illusion. Aunt Margaret, frail but unyielding, rose to her feet. Her hands trembled, her breath uneven, yet her eyes were clear. "Samuel lied to all of us," she said, her voice breaking but carrying through the hall like a gavel strike. "He kidnapped this family, held us hostage with his arrogance, his greed, his lies." She shook her head slowly, tears spilling, and I was blind to it. We all were. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Samuel's face twisted, veins bulging across his temples, his body trembling as the last shred of control slipped away. He slammed both fists on the table, sending silverware scattering, his roar echoing against the walls. "I'll never let him take everything." To end the nightmare, I had to strike the final blow. The words pulsed in my head as I stood, my palms pressed flat against the mahogany table that only hours ago had been a stage for humiliation. Now it had transformed into an altar of judgment, every gleaming plate and trembling candle reflecting the weight of truth waiting to be unleashed. Samuel still seethed at the head of the table, his face a mask of rage stretched thin, but I could see the cracks widening. His roar in the last chapter of this long night still echoed faintly, but now his power had shriveled to a desperate snarl. The others no longer looked at him with reverence or even fear. They looked at me, at Grace, at the truth poised to cut through his lies once and for all. I reached into my briefcase, my hand steady though, my heart thundered and pulled out a leather folder. The sound of its clasp clicking open seemed to slice through the murmurs, silencing the room. I laid the documents flat on the table, sliding them across the polished wood for all to see. Pages thick with notarized signatures, each bearing the undeniable seal of legitimacy. "These," I said evenly, letting my voice carry, "are certified financial records from grandfather's estate. They detail the transfer of corporate shares, property holdings, and assets. Each one signed, sealed, and filed with the court names me as the rightful beneficiary." I paused, meeting their wide eyes. This is not rumor, not manipulation. This is law. Grace rose beside me, her presence like a steady anchor. She adjusted her glasses, picked up one of the papers, and held it beneath the chandelier's unforgiving light. The notary seal glimmered golden against the parchment, a small symbol with the force of thunder. "I, Grace Thompson, attorney of record, verify that these documents were entered into the probate system 3 years ago," she announced, her voice calm and firm. "They have been authenticated by the court, and no claim of forgery can stand against them." Gasps rippled through the hall. My uncle leaned forward, squinting at the embossed stamp, then fell back into his chair, his lips muttering in disbelief. Victoria's painted smile faltered into a shadow of regret, her eyes darting between me and Samuel as though calculating the ruins of her choices. Even the younger cousins, once laughing at me with cruel delight, stared in awed silence. The climax struck in a single dazzling moment. Grace raised the document higher, and the seal caught the chandelier's light perfectly, casting a glint that danced across the faces of everyone in the room. It was irrefutable, an emblem of judgment delivered from beyond the grave. Grandfather's hand still guided us, and Samuel's empire of lies collapsed under that light. Samuel's face contorted as though the truth itself had slapped him. He shook his head violently, knocking over his wineglass, crimson liquid spilling across the tablecloth like blood. "No!" he barked, his voice hoarse. "No, this is all a trick, a conspiracy against me." He lunged forward, grabbing at the papers as if tearing them apart could erase their reality, but Grace's hand snapped them back with the precision of a blade. I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time he flinched. "It's over," I said quietly but firmly. "The court has spoken, and your reign of deceit is finished." The silence that followed was unbearable in its finality. Then Samuel's fury exploded, desperate and unhinged. He grabbed his untouched glass, hurled it across the room, and it shattered against the wall in a spray of shards. His snarl tore through the air. "If I go down, I'll drag you with me." The laughter that once humiliated me was gone, replaced by shame and silence. Only hours earlier, this dining hall had echoed with cruel jests. Every raised glass, another dagger aimed at my chest. Now the air was thick, heavy with the weight of truths, too undeniable to dismiss. The chandeliers still burned bright, but their light seemed colder, sharper, casting each face in merciless clarity. The grand feast lay untouched. Dishes that once looked sumptuous now congealed and forgotten, candles guttering low with wax spilling down their holders. The room had become a battlefield aftermath, no victors, only broken alliances. My relatives, who had rallied so quickly behind Samuel's sneers, now shifted uncomfortably, their whispers turning venomous, not toward me, but toward him. Uncle Richard was the first to speak, his voice tremulous but cutting. "All this time, you lied to us, Samuel. You stole, you hid, you mocked him while knowing the truth." He shoved back his chair, its scrape harsh against the marble floor, and stalked toward the door without looking back. One by one, others followed. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all who had once joined in the chorus of mockery now peeled away, their faces pale, their eyes avoiding Samuel as though his disgrace might stain them too. Victoria, however, remained. She had not laughed since the envelope was laid upon the table. Her dazzling poise had begun to unravel, strand by strand. Her once glittering smile now looked forced, brittle as cracked porcelain. She rose, smoothing her dress with trembling hands, and approached me. The click of her heels echoed in the near-empty room. "Ethan," she whispered, her tone suddenly soft, intimate. You've changed so much. I didn't know. No one did. We were young then. Foolish. I didn't understand what I was giving up." Her eyes searched mine, desperate, glistening as though she thought tears might soften the years of betrayal. "But maybe it isn't too late to make things right. We can start again, you and I." Her words twisted the knife of memory. The night she left me, choosing the gilded promise of Samuel's wealth over my devotion, replayed in sharp detail. The cold dismissal, the smirk on Samuel's lips as he claimed victory over my heart. Every humiliation since had carried the echo of that choice. I drew a long breath, steadying myself, and let the weight of truth settle between us. My voice was calm, even colder than the November wind outside. "You abandoned me for wealth. Tonight you learned what true wealth is." Her face crumpled as though struck. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her painted lips quivered, then pressed tight, holding back the sob she could no longer disguise. She turned away sharply, her heels clicking faster now, retreating into the shadows of the corridor, where her reflection warped in the tall gilt mirrors. Silence reclaimed the room, broken only by the faint crackle of candle flames. I turned back toward the table, where Samuel still sat. He had not moved since the evidence crushed him, but his body sagged now, shoulders slumped, his once commanding posture collapsing like a throne of rotted wood. He looked smaller, diminished, yet when his eyes met mine, they still burned with something fierce, unbroken, hatred, pure, undying hatred. And in that gaze, I knew, though I had won the battle tonight, Samuel had not surrendered the war. Samuel slumps in his chair, defeated, yet his eyes burn with undying hatred. That night wasn't just dinner, It was Judgment Day. The echoes of shattered glass, of accusations hurled and truths unveiled, still lingered in the air as the long night drew to its end. The dining hall, once a theater of cruelty and spectacle, now resembled a battlefield abandoned after defeat. Plates of untouched turkey sat congealed in their juices, wine glasses half empty and forgot. Candles burned down to stubs, their wax hardened into small, grotesque sculptures that clung to the silver candelabras. The grandeur of the Miller mansion had become hollow, its magnificence stripped bare, just as Samuel had been stripped of his mask. Family members drifted like ghosts, silent and subdued. No one dared to meet my gaze anymore. The shame was too heavy, too raw. The same lips that had laughed at me, that had shaped the words poor and pathetic, were now sealed tight in regret. Aunts avoided one another's eyes, cousins retreated into corners, uncles muttered excuses as they slipped away through side doors, unwilling to linger in the ruins of Samuel's empire. Grace stood beside me, steady as ever, her presence a quiet anchor amid the chaos. She gathered her papers into her briefcase with calm precision, as though she had just concluded a trial rather than dismantled an empire. Her voice was low, meant only for me. "It's over, Ethan. You did what they thought impossible." But I shook my head slowly. It's never truly over, not with him. Across the room, Samuel sat alone at the head of the table that had once been his throne. His chair seemed too large for him now, his frame slouched, his clothes disheveled. He had not spoken since his final outburst. But silence didn't equal surrender. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles whitened, and though his head bowed, his eyes occasionally lifted to scorch me with a glare that still carried venom. Victoria had vanished into the night, unable to bear the weight of her defeat. Others had left in shame, or anger, or fear of association. But Samuel remained, not because of pride, no. Pride had already betrayed him, but because of hate. Hate held him there like chains. Grace touched my arm gently. "Come, you don't need to stay here any longer. Let the house rot with his lies." We walked together toward the front doors. Each step down the hallway felt like shedding a burden, leaving behind years of humiliation, scorn, and pain. The portraits of ancestors along the walls, once looming over me like judges, now felt like silent witnesses to justice belated but not denied. The cold November air hit my face as we stepped outside. Dawn was breaking at the horizon, painting the suburban sky in streaks of gray and pale gold. The mansion stood behind us like a relic of arrogance, its windows dark, its stone walls lifeless. I drew a long breath, letting the chill settle in my lungs, grounding me in a reality I had fought so long to reclaim. Inside, Samuel remained, the empire he had stolen, crumbling beneath him. I thought of the words I had spoken at dinner, words born of humiliation and defiance. "You will regret every word once you learn the truth." Tonight, the promise had been fulfilled. Justice may come late, but it always comes. I turned, ready to leave it all behind, but something compelled me to glance back one final time. Through the tall, arched window of the dining hall, I saw him, Samuel's figure, a dark silhouette against the faint flicker of dying candlelight, sat rigid in his chair. His face was pale in the dawn, but his eyes, those eyes still burned with undying fury. And in that glare, I knew the truth. Though this chapter had closed, the story was not finished. As I stepped into the morning air, Samuel's glare through the window promised this battle isn't truly over. Betrayal had reigned in that mansion for too long, but in the end, truth shattered every mask. The lies that once humiliated and silenced were dragged into the open, proving that no thief of dignity can hold power forever. Justice may come late, but when it arrives, it strikes with the weight of years carried in silence, reminding us that courage is the only antidote to injustice. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt the same injustice and triumph, or 2 if you think the ending left you wanting more.